In this third session of Module 1, we are going to look at the learning obstacles faced by children with autism, because it's only when we understand these obstacles well that we can work out how to help children with autism overcome them. So let's begin. It is much harder for children with autism to learn. But why? There are two reasons for it. One is that there are certain obstacles caused by autism itself in their learning. And the second, that there are certain behaviors that many children with autism have that interfere in the process of learning. And these two things often come together, and the learning becomes much harder, and their general development and learning slows down. So what are the obstacles faced by children with autism? But let's look at how typically developing children learn and what makes it difficult for children with autism to learn. One of the ways typically developing children start learning is by sharing their interest with others and sharing in others' interests. Very early on, from the age of about 9 months, they start pointing at things and drawing others' interest towards it. And if one points to something and says, "Wow, aeroplane," they turn and look at it and they understand that that thing is called an aeroplane. And with things like that, with events like that, they start learning. Children with autism, on the other hand, have difficulty in sharing their interest and thinking with others. They either don't have much interest in that, or they lack the skill to do that. They also don't pay attention to others' interests. So it becomes much harder for parents and carers to point out to something interesting, call its name, and help their child learn. Typically developing infants start communicating with others from very early age. They use sounds, gestures, words, and they are communicating something to others. Then others are making some responses, and these infants and children are learning from others' responses to their communication attempts. Children with autism, on the other hand, either lack an interest or have poor skills in communicating with others. And even when they make some effort to communicate with others, others have difficulty in understanding what they're saying. And they have then a difficulty in responding to them. So these children are not getting the response that typically developing children are getting. So it's much harder for them to learn. Typically developing children pay attention to what people say, to what people do, and how they behave, and they learn from that. Children with autism, on the other hand, have limited attention. And at the same time, they have a self-orientation. They find it hard to pay attention to others, and that in itself restricts their learning. Children with autism pay attention to a diverse range of objects. They look at what these things do and what they are used for, and that's how they're learning. Children with autism, on the other hand, have limited interests, or at times their interests are quite unusual, like in certain colors or certain numbers or certain type of shapes. So their range for learning is narrowed and restricted. Typically developing children receive social feedback from others. When they communicate or interact with others, others say, "Oh, wow, lovely," and they're motivated. They practice and they learn and they become motivated. As they do better, they get more rewards and they practice and learn even more. Children with autism, on the other hand, don't receive the same kind of feedback from others, either because others are not understanding what they're saying or they're not able to communicate that much. So their learning and their motivation is less because they're not receiving the right kind of feedback, the right kind of reward. They don't become motivated, they don't become practice, and they don't learn in the same way. Now look at some of the behaviors which seem to interfere in the learning of children with autism. Many children with autism have strong or unusual interests, such as some specific toy or some specific activity. Now, that restricts their range of knowing about things. It also makes it harder to interact and to communicate with others, and their learning narrows down. Many children with autism have sensory interests or sensory aversions, and these are called sensory behaviors. Now, when a child has sensory behavior, either the child is too distracted towards something and is not paying attention to other things from which he or she is supposed to learn, or the child is becoming too stressed and upset and is not able to pay attention to other things from which he or she is able to learn. So that's what restricts their learning as well. Quite often, children with autism have difficult or challenging behavior. Now, that behavior makes it hard for them to participate in any activity, and for others to include them in activities. It makes it harder for them to be with other children and for other children to include them in activities with them. So that restricts and limits their learning. Finally, many children with autism become excited too easily. They are often very anxious and they have a number of fears. And whenever one is excited, anxious, or fearful, you're not able to pay attention to learning things. You're not able to pay attention to what the others are saying, sharing, or showing. So you're not learning. In Module 1, we learned about the EmPOWER approach, what is autism, how does it affect children, and the learning obstacles faced by children with autism. Now, the next step is to go to Module 2. In the Module 2, we're going to learn about how to make a profile of your child with autism, a profile of your child's function and your child's needs. Because it's only when you have a profile of your child, you can decide what kind of help does your child need. And you can always come back and update the profile, and you can share the profile with others who may be helping your child. So let's move to the Module 2.